are watching Breakthrough News, and this is The Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here as always, alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, as always, great to be back alongside you.
It's good to be back alongside you, Eugene.
Of course. Well, it's great to be with all of our viewers who are out there. As always, we've got a great show lined up for you here today. And I will remind those of you who are watching on YouTube, now is a great opportunity to go ahead and hit the subscribe button, then hit the bell so you get the alerts for the things that you have subscribed to. So that way you can get easy access to all of the other fantastic content that we have coming here from Breakthrough News, including Dispatches with Rania Khalek and everything else. So hit subscribe, hit the bell, so that way you get the alerts for the things you subscribe to, and it'll make your life easier, and it certainly will lead to some informational enrichment for you as well. And if you're watching on Free Speech TV, of course, all you got to do is keep watching. Big shout out to the FSTV team, as always, for making it possible for us to appear to you on that platform. Rania, as we get started here, are there other things you would like to relay to our viewers?
Yeah, I am talking to you, Eugene, as always, from Beirut, where I'm just waiting for the Israelis to bomb the city. They have issued displacement warnings for residents of, I believe, 8 different buildings in Beirut's southern suburbs. It's completely chaotic. There's Israeli drones in the sky, people firing gunshots to tell people to leave, and people just trying to flee before the Israelis bomb. People are expecting bunker buster bombings because the Israelis are saying that they want to hit underground facilities they're claiming that Hezbollah is building drones in. I want to remind everybody that we are in a ceasefire right now, a ceasefire that has included over 1,000 Israeli violations since the end of last November, and no violations by the Lebanese side. And Israel just repeatedly bombs and does whatever it feels like doing with zero consequence. And it's just, I'm pretty distraught about this right now, Eugene. I mean, how can I not be, right? But it's just, it's the eve of Eid al-Adha, which is a very big holiday in this part of the world. People were just probably like getting their kids ready for bed as they were preparing for the holiday, probably spending the weekend with family. It's kicking off the summer season in Lebanon, when a lot of people are expected to be visiting. I know I have friends who are actually visiting right now who are here. I have friends and family who are coming in the coming weeks, as everybody in Lebanon does. And so this can only really be seen as an attempt for the Israelis to derail that tourist season for Lebanon after a horrible war where they devastated a lot of the country. So yeah, we're just sitting here in Lebanon and Beirut waiting for the Israelis to bomb. And that comes, I know we're going to be talking about this later in the show, but it comes as Israel is, starving Palestinians in Gaza to death, luring them to these fake aid traps to shoot and kill them, bombing hospitals again and again, and doing horrible things in the West Bank, bombing Syria. Just, and the UN today at the Security Council blocked a resolution for a ceasefire. I know that's not usually the spiel I give, but it's just, hard not to be overwhelmed and distracted by the incoming bombing of Beirut. But I do want to remind our audience to please make sure you hit that like button, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel, and also make sure you hit the notification button, because I'm convinced that we're in algorithmic jail at the moment, Eugene, which is another story in and of itself. So let's try to break that. And also, if you support our coverage here at Breakthrough News, where we tell you the reality of what's happening and don't peddle the lies of empire, please consider becoming a member of Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. It helps keep us going and growing. I'll just throw that back to you, Eugene.
Absolutely. Well said, well summarized. Obviously, we'll swing back around to some of these stories later as we continue to go. We are going to start the story here with I don't know how big of news it is in the front page, but certainly a major international story, and that is the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, and everything going on around that. We'll get into a lot of it, but we are very, very happy to be joined here on the show once again by Brian Becker, who's the host of the Socialist program that also appears here on Wednesday evenings, and here by that I mean Breakthrough News. Brian, as always, thank you so much for being with us.
Great to be with both of you. Thanks so much.
Well, great to have you here. Obviously, Trump had an hour-long phone call with Putin yesterday. There's a lot of talk about peace. But one of the things I thought was interesting, Brian, is recently, I think it was actually now a couple weeks ago, Marco Rubio was being confronted by some, I think, Democrats in Congress about the alleged pro-Russian position of the Trump administration. And he noted that not one sanction has been removed from Russia. They're still sending money. They're still sending weapons. So as much as there's, a lot of talk about peace and peace talks, it still seems that, the war continues to grind on, and that despite the various attempts to label Trump as pro-Putin, that he, in fact, is continuing also to maintain the American position in the conflict.
Yeah, and I'm quite sure Vladimir Putin doesn't think of Donald Trump as pro-Putin or pro-Russia. This kind of bizarro political line of the Democratic Party after they lost the election in 2016, which has continued nonstop, that Trump is somehow a Kremlin puppet and like in love with Vladimir Putin, is belied by the fact that the Trump administration in its first term dramatically increased the sanctions on Russia, much greater than those imposed by Obama, sent many heavier weapons to Ukraine than the same weapons like the Javelin missiles that Obama had refused to send because Obama's contention was that they would be inherently escalatory and lead to a greater conflict. Trump did all that. And so this idea that Trump is a Kremlin puppet, and let's face it, during the election campaign, when Biden and then his, Kamala Harris, who came after him, basically tried to sell their reelection bid on the basis that they were the guys or the women, the people who had confronted Russia so tenaciously. And most people in the United States don't care about that. They're not really worried about Russia. They're not thinking about Russia. They're not thinking about Ukraine. And Biden and Kamala Harris said, we made NATO stronger. And Trump smartly said, well, I'm for peace. And if I had been president, this war would have never happened. And that actually resonates with people in the United States, people who are Democrats, people who are Republicans, people who are independents. People don't want endless war. So the idea that because Trump said he wanted peace, that meant he was pro-Putin, that just shows how far gone American politics is, including bourgeois liberalism. When I was a kid, Eugene and Rania, the liberals were the people who wanted good relations with the Soviet Union, wanted peace talks with the Soviet Union, wanted disarmament, wanted nuclear freeze. Now the Democratic Party, supposedly in the name of bourgeois liberalism, or liberalism as they would call it, have accelerated the conflict with Russia and China to such an extent that this anomaly, like Donald Trump, could somehow be presented as being pro-peace or pro-Putin, when in fact neither is the case.
Well, Brian, I have to say, I watch a lot of American mainstream media because I do it so you don't have to. And I was watching just before we were getting ready to do the live stream, and there was this meeting in the Oval Office between Trump and one of the German leaders, I believe. And so all of the talk was about Ukraine. And the conversation was all about how Trump has given up on Ukraine and how Europe needs to be going with this war forward. And I think it's really interesting because, in the beginning of this war, it seemed as though it really was the U.S. having to pull Europe into this war, and there was a part of the European leadership that was actually trying to still promote diplomacy and push against, more aggression, more NATO aggression. But that seems to be completely gone now. And now, as you do have these statements from Donald Trump, whether he means them or not, saying Europe's got to do it itself. I want to force peace. All of the things that get Trump labeled pro-Putin in the U.S. mainstream media. It's now like you have the Europeans being like, no, wait, we want this war to continue forever against our own interests. And if you don't do it, we're all going to arm up and do it ourselves. I'm just curious of what you make of that change.
Yeah, it's really an extraordinary change. In fact, I don't think the European capitalist governments are actually speaking for the European people, the working class, the middle class, the poor in Europe. I don't think the mass of the people in Europe view Russia as an existential enemy, but you would get the picture that there's really great alarm by the EU leadership that there might be peace in Ukraine, that peace might break out. I mean, it's so nonsensical. It's so absurd, in fact, because here you had Europe dependent on low-cost Russian natural gas, for instance, that keep the standard of living somewhat reasonably priced in Europe. All that's gone now because the U.S. under Biden, Blinken, Sullivan, and the NATO High Command basically torpedoed the negotiations that could have led to a peaceful resolution of the crisis in Ukraine prior to Russia's invasion in 2022. That did not happen. That was a deliberate decision by NATO to sabotage the negotiations. The U.S. felt if Russia invaded Europe, that two things would happen. One, Russia would be ultimately weakened because it would be evicted from the world economy and subject to heavy sanctions, and that the European capitalists would be even more closely wedded to the United States under the rubric of NATO, which is a U.S.-led military alliance. Here we are a few years later. Obviously, Trump has come to the conclusion, and he represents a sector in the U.S. political establishment that believes the war is lost, that Russia's not getting weaker, that this whole thing is a debacle. It's another lost war, like Iraq, like Afghanistan, like earlier Vietnam. They can't win and that they need to end it. But here you have the European capitalists who are so groveling before U.S. imperialism and so groveling before Wall Street and the military-industrial complex that they are actually afraid that the U.S. might reorient a U.S. foreign policy such that they would not consider the European allies to be that important as they were, say, in the post-World War II era. And so you have this weird situation where at the expense of European living standards, the European capitalists are actually demanding that the U.S. maintain a more warlike position against Russia. I mean, this is a bizarre turn in world politics. And again, I think it's why the political center in Europe is going to collapse. And if the left doesn't gain ground, the ground will be gained by far-right parties who will, in the name of nationalism, say we have to break free from the stranglehold of the U.S., which is leading us to World War III. The far right will gain. So again, you see this center, the capitalist center, it collapsed with Biden and Kamala Harris. It's collapsing in Europe, and these representatives, like the German leadership today, they represent a collapsing center. Either the left will rise and succeed, or the right will rise and succeed. But it's basically a death knell for the center.
Yeah. Well, certainly something we can see from the Polish elections, presidential elections that just took place, and I think, many other elections that are happening. I'm glad you mentioned the issue of the military spending. Mark Bottenga, the MP from the PTB, the Workers' Party of Belgium, who Rania interviewed on her show Dispatches recently, he said in a recent appearance in Italy that if we're not careful, if we don't resist, that the healthcare quality of Europe will become as bad as America, which in and of itself I thought said something about the role of the U.S. military-industrial complex. But I think a lot of this also speaks to the role of NATO historically, and I think the lies we've been told about it, but the key role it's played, especially, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, in being a key imperial tool. Mark Rutte, who used to be the, of course, Prime Minister of Netherlands, is now the head of NATO, said this today, I believe. He said, NATO is the most powerful defensive alliance in world history. It's even more powerful than the Roman Empire and more powerful than Napoleon's empire. I thought that was an interesting commentary because last time I checked, neither the Roman Empire nor Napoleon were known as particularly defensive.
Nor did they last. I mean, that's really interesting. If Europe is comparing itself to the Roman Empire, which obviously declined and then fell, and certainly the debacle for Napoleon, I mean, let's never forget Waterloo. Mm-hmm. I mean, these were empires who were basically addicted to militarism, addicted to an overextended military operation. And in both cases, it led to the downfall of the empire. This is precisely what will happen for the U.S. empire with NATO at the very center of it. I mean, NATO expanded east after the Soviet Union fell, in spite of the fact that there was no longer a so-called threat or even a pretextual threat from the east. So why did they move east? Basically for two reasons. One was to be able to make sure that Russia never got back on its feet again, so it could never be a major power and thus even a regional rival to U.S. hegemony in that part of the world. And secondly, the U.S. wanted to incorporate all of Central and Eastern Europe basically as neo-colonies under the an American sphere of influence for its corporate exploitation, its corporate profit, and as an extension of American military power. In both cases, this has been to the great detriment to the people of Eastern and Central Europe. And I think the romance with the West is really coming to an end. The question is, what will replace it? Will the left be able to significantly organize against NATO, against U.S. imperialism, and against this war and demand peace? Or will the far right and fascist forces do it?
You know, Brian, I think another interesting aspect of all of this is, having witnessed the last 20 months now of horrific genocide in Gaza and the complete, bulldozing of whatever semblance of international law and norms even existed before. All that's gone. We're just in an era of pure barbarism. And so to watch all of these American officials and European officials cry over any sort of bombing that takes place in Ukraine. And look, bombing sucks. It's horrible. But it just seems so fake because these same people are cheering on the most horrific thing we've ever seen in our lifetimes in Gaza. And I guess this is kind of just a bigger question about, what this means moving forward in terms of warfare. It just kind of seems like, there's no space to even have red lines anymore, because how can you take red lines about anything seriously when the so-called civilized world has normalized destroying hospitals and starving babies to death?
Well, the thing that so strikes one about Gaza in particular, and so emblematic of exactly what you're talking about, Rania, is that the Israeli army is one of the most developed military apparatuses in the world. Most highly armed. It's also nuclear armed. It's at war against the people who have no army, they have no air force, they have no ability to have air defenses. They are people living outside of their homes because their homes have been destroyed. There are people who, when they're wounded, cannot go to the hospital because the hospitals have been blown up. And so you have the world watching. And in the case of NATO countries, and in the case of the United States, financing and justifying and defending this barbaric assault against obviously defenseless people in Gaza. And it's a ho-hum attitude. In fact, if you look at the United States, you would think the biggest danger as a consequence of the Gaza war was not the danger faced by the people in Gaza, but the danger faced by American Jews on the basis of the so-called rise of anti-Semitism. And so American universities are being targeted by the U.S. government for, quote, not being sufficiently strong defending Jewish people. Even though the protests in support of Palestine have been, outside of the Palestinian and Arab American students, have been largely led by young Jewish Americans. This use of anti-Semitism associated with or conflated with the state of Israel at the time the state of Israel is committing genocide is so jarring to sensibilities that I actually think the masses of people, I mean really broad numbers of people who are not engaged in politics, maybe not normally paying that careful attention to politics, are so morally repulsed by what they see and what they can see and what they hear. And they know it's BS. They know when the U.S. says the big problem right now is anti-Semitism, at the same time that the state that speaks in the name of the Jewish people, wrongly, I think, is carrying out this genocide against defenseless civilians, means that the ruling class basically has no longer able to nurture public opinion. And public opinion has shifted, and it will never shift back. It's not like the 20-year-olds who are mortified by the genocide in Gaza are going to, at age 30, think, I really think Israel's now a state and something
Right.
that we want to look up to. That's not going to happen. So all around the world, the masses of people who can see for themselves and who have any semblance of humanity are rejecting this narrative by the U.S. And in fact, I think more than just sort of discrediting the Israeli ruling class or Israel, the Israeli project, it discredits the U.S. government. It discredits NATO. It discredits both political parties. The moral capacity or the pretense towards morality or ethics has been completely shredded by the Gaza conflict. And this means that the moral standing that the U.S. tries to assert to show that it's a special nation, it's an exceptional nation, its policies are based on wanting to do good and to defend democracy, all of that is down the drain. And so we're going into a new political era where political legitimacy is up for grabs because it no longer is embraced or accepted by the U.S. government, or certainly it's not perceived that way by the masses of people. So we're in a new political era. Gaza is the turning point. Gaza is the moment of inflection. Gaza will be remembered in history as the turning point for Western societies. And I think it's really all up to us, to Eugene, to Rania, to Breakthrough, to the Answer Coalition, to the Palestinian Youth Movement, to all of the organizations, and there are hundreds of them, that are trying to do the right thing by organizing to stop the genocide. This is the moral issue of the moment. And you're absolutely right, Rania. The barbarism is there for all to see. You can't be a, quote, democracy and be a barbaric pro-genocidal regime. And that's true not only in Tel Aviv, but it's true in Washington, D.C. as well.
Well, Brian, you are the host of the Socialist program, which everyone can catch here every Wednesday on Breakthrough News. As always, we appreciate you giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Great to be here.
Rania?
Well, Eugene, just, Israel seems to have bombed some buildings in the southern suburbs of Beirut. So waiting to see if it's the end or if there's more to come. Seems so far there's a couple, so I'll just keep you all updated on that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, wow, so much like you said. But let's continue to move the show forward here. We want to turn to another critically important issue, and that is the massive impact of cuts to Medicaid and other healthcare programs in the United States that are set to begin here with the upcoming the completion of the upcoming budgetary talks in Congress. And we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show by Michael Furllo, who is a licensed practical nurse in New Haven, Connecticut, and part of SEIU 1199 Northeast. Michael, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here to help us sort through all of this. And you've been working in nursing homes for over 20 years, including at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, by the way. And I was hoping you could just describe for us the general conditions, for in nursing homes and the issues of underfunding and how that's really shaping life for you, the workers, and of course, the residents as well.
Well, I can tell you the conditions in nursing homes, they're not great. We are lacking supplies. There is a serious issue with residents not having the daily supplies that they need for their activities of daily living. I mean, something just as simple as slippers. We have residents walking around in socks. They have no shoes. So during the pandemic, we risked our lives to come in and take care of residents who were positive with the COVID virus. We were told that we're essential. You come in, you take care of these residents, we will take care of you. This is what we were told. And we did that. We came to work. We risked our lives and the lives of the loved ones who lived with us, because at that time, nobody really knew what the virus was going to do. And jump 5 years later, and we're still dealing with underfunding. We're still dealing with a lack of important supplies. In my opinion, I don't see that things have gotten any better. In my opinion, we are still in a form of a pandemic.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's really stunning when you think about how little has changed in that sense. And, you and other nurses are buying things out of your own pockets for residents, things like soap and food. And then at the same time, you have the federal government moving to slash Medicaid and Medicare, which are, of course, these lifelines for so many elderly and disabled people across the country. So I'm curious if you can talk a bit about what these cuts will mean for your facility and for the people that you care for every single day.
These cuts would be devastating to really to any nursing facility. They would be devastating. The majority of the residents who I care for are either on Medicaid or on Medicare. I know a lot of facilities do rely on this funding in order to care for the residents. So you have to think like this. These nursing homes are these residents' homes. This is where they live. And a lot of, with these slashes, with these cuts, there are going to be residents with nowhere to live, with nowhere to go. Because if Medicare stops paying for their bed at the nursing home, I'm not confident that these nursing home owners are going to opt on the side of losing money. I've seen residents put out in the past. I can't say, for financial reasons necessarily, but I do know how nursing homes operate. And if you can't pay to be there, if the state stops your funding, they don't just keep you there.
I mean, it's an amazing issue. I mean, because this is like, we're talking about nursing homes, right? And this is like our senior citizens, our parents, our grandparents. Like, this is one area where I think everyone feels like you want to have the best possible everything. But it seems like what you're saying is that there's almost like an apartheid style system. Like, if you can pay, you're going to be in a great facility. But for anybody who isn't privileged enough to have a lot of money and a great retirement plan, that already it seems like we're seeing a lot of nursing homes close, that this crisis could just get worse.
Yes, I mean, I think in the future, this is where we're headed. We're headed for more nursing homes closing. We're headed for a more of a situation where nursing home owners are treating these nursing homes as a vehicle to make millions of dollars. I mean, let's just be honest here. They're making millions of dollars and they're treating the nursing homes as a way to just increase their profits. Healthcare is serious business. If you get into healthcare, you get into it because you're trying to take care of people, not trying to make as much money as you can. So the lack of funding, what I can tell you, what I see in the nursing home that I work in, I mean, we don't have soap. And so just imagine a nursing home where we can't find soap. Last night, the supervisor was able to find 2 bottles of soap. And that had to last my shift, which is the evening shift. It had to last for the night shift. These are the types of situations that we're coming into. Another thing which is very minor, but it's a big deal, is trash bags. You got to have trash bags in a nursing home. The kind of stuff that goes into a trash bag at a nursing home, believe me, it's serious. So when we don't have a simple thing as trash bags and we're trying to properly dispose of medical waste, that makes the job more challenging. It puts a strain on infection control, which is what our main goal is to limit the amount of exposure, for other residents. So we very rarely do we have enough trash bags. We're always looking for trash bags. The trash bags that we do have, you could blow into it and it'll blow a hole right through it. That's how thin they are. So I mean, I can go on and on and on. Last night I had no tape to do dressings. So when I'm trying to change someone's bandage, you need tape. That's pretty important. Last night the nurse who works across the hall from me had no tape. We were looking, I mean, I can't tell you how much time we spent looking for tape. And we were able to find a type of waterproof tape that really isn't appropriate for dressings. So, I mean, long story short, this is no way for healthcare workers to have to try to do their job by searching for supplies through the majority of the shift, or what's going on, like was said before, is healthcare workers that I work with are buying soap from Walmart. They're buying the supplies that they need so that when they come to work, they can take care of a resident with the dignity and the respect that they deserve.
And I mean, these are some serious, serious challenges that you're describing. And I'm just curious, despite all of this, you and your coworkers are still organizing, still speaking out. So can you talk a bit about what keeps you going, and how are nursing home workers fighting back to protect both their rights as workers and the dignity of the residents they care for?
Well, with the 1199, with the unions, our strongest card is to strike. Our unity, our strength in numbers, our ability to stand together shoulder to shoulder. That's something that's very powerful. That's something that we were able to, the threat of a strike, we were able to implement against the state of Connecticut. And we went from them saying, we'll give you $0 to them giving a significant amount of money, So the ability to strike is something that we don't use that ability lightly. Okay, so when we say that we're going to go on strike, that's not something that we want to do. That's not something that we take lightly. It's serious consequences for striking. But I think that what happens is you get so frustrated at the lack of supplies, at I haven't gotten a raise in, I don't know, it's been about 6 years now. So as a nurse, a nurse doesn't deserve to get a raise, so there are a lot of issues that that we are able to deal with through 1199, through the ability to organize and through the ability to strike. But I have to tell you, a lot of the nurses and CNAs who I work with, we're passionate about taking care of the residents. That means more to us than anything, is making sure that the residents are properly cared for. This is what we come to work for. This is why we came during the pandemic. This is why we get up and we come into work. We buy supplies that the facility is not supplying, because we care about these people.
Well, Michael, you are showing why the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said that 1199 was his favorite union. And we really appreciate you being willing to join us here on the Freedom Side and help just explain what's really going on inside the nursing home sector.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Rania, I have to say, the famous Tupac lyric, "They got money for war, can't feed the poor." I mean, kind of amazing that, our nursing homes are struggling like this, but, you can send unlimited bombs to whoever, Israel, Ukraine, whoever it may be.
No, not just unlimited bombs. I mean, I'm literally sitting in a place right now where the Israelis are bombing as we speak. The Israelis have struck Beirut at least 3 times, possibly more. The ground is shaking for people near those strikes, and the U.S. just sends unlimited amounts of weapons. Those are American bombs being dropped in the city I am talking to you from, while there are workers in nursing homes in the U.S. having to buy soap for elderly people who are being cut off from desperately needed government aid. It's insane. It's completely insane.
It is. Let me ask you a question regarding the bombing of Lebanon that I think maybe is relevant for people. And I might be wrong, but it seems like, there's still so much reconstruction left from, the war that had just happened. This feels like this has to be a significant compounding of the humanitarian crisis there in Lebanon, and because it's adding on to what already, is so destroyed.
I mean, yeah, Eugene, there was so much housing destroyed, but actually more of it was destroyed after the ceasefire because Israel has continued bombing Lebanon, mostly in the south, and destroying people's homes. The idea is to have these populations and, supposed Hezbollah strongholds never return to the border areas. But also there's a siege on these people's communities because they're not able to bring in money. Israel and the U.S. have pressured the Lebanese government, which is basically like completely under U.S. control at this moment, to stop money from coming into the country that is destined for communities in areas that were destroyed by the war. So, cash is being confiscated at the airport. So they're using reconstruction aid to basically put political pressure on the country, on the government, to try to disarm Hezbollah so that they don't have to ever worry again about anybody standing up to anything they do in Lebanon or beyond. So it's not just the bombings, it's also using the economic pressure of the U.S. With the help of the Israelis to prevent Lebanon from even reconstructing. It's completely insane. And it's just, this is not a way for people to have to live in certain neighborhoods, understanding that at any moment, the Israeli spokesperson in Arabic, Avikai Adri, will just tweet out a warning for you to be displaced from your home on Twitter, and you have no choice but to leave because they're going to drop a bomb on it. That's what's happening tonight. Just complete mayhem. And I really want people to think about that. That's what the U.S. is funding. I want people who are sitting at home right now, comfortably watching this program, to think about what it would be like to, at any moment, have something completely out of your control, someone just tell you, you have to leave your home or die in it immediately, now, like no time. Take what you can think to take and get the hell out. That's what people in Lebanon have to deal with, living next to this insane, psychotic U.S.-backed country.
Yeah, it's really, well, it's not unbelievable because it's been happening for so long, but it's certainly outrageous. Interestingly enough, almost at the exact same time the bombing started, the news came out that Smotrich said now it's time for sovereignty over the West Bank. So, it's just this extreme, bloodthirsty settler expansionism happening, the ethnic cleansing in southern Lebanon, obviously what they're doing in Syria, ongoing issues in the West Bank, obviously what's happening in Gaza. There's so many different, fronts to this, but it's so clear, and it's all facilitated by the United States in every possible way, financially, militarily, propaganda-wise, right? Even just that alone, which is just this constant statements from U.S. officials, supporting them, that's what stiffens their back. If you know that you're going to have the Lindsey Grahams of the world, saying that it's completely justified to have this person and that person, the U.S. mainstream media, of course, which even when they're trying to be critical, it's still relatively supportive of Israel, but they're almost never trying to be critical either. Many of them outright openly supporting Israel in many different regards, especially several of the hosts on CNN. So really a harrowing situation on many different fronts.
And I just want to know, before we move on to our next guest, Eugene, that it's being reported that the Israelis have used bunker buster bombs. So if that's the case, those are definitely American weapons. Those are supplied to the Israelis, those bombs that, hit deep inside of the earth by the Americans. And it's just really jarring to have my tax dollars being spent to bomb the city I'm living in. It's crazy. They're almost certainly flying F-16s. Which are definitely American. So, more people are knowing, but people should definitely look this up and learn more about it. Well, we'll continue to update people as this goes forward here, as we continue to record. We're going to turn our attention to the country just south of the United States, Mexico, which just had a momentous election for judges there. I believe the first time in history, but if I'm wrong about that, our next guest will correct me. We are very, very honored to be joined here once again on the show by Kurt Hackbarth, who's a writer and journalist for Jacobin Magazine and host of the Soberania, the Mexican Politics podcast. Kurt, thank you so much for being back with us.
Thanks very much, guys. Remember the last time I was on, I was in a dark kitchen that I just moved. So things are a little bit more established and in order this time.
Good. I like that. I appreciate that. If we had a little more time, I'd ask you to give us a little tour, of what your new place is looking like.
Well, it's nice. It's downtown Mexico City. It's one of those old buildings from the 50s when they made apartments that were actually big enough to live in, right?
Oof.
Not anymore.
Amazing. Well, Kurt, we just had the election, the judicial election. I think the last time we had you on, that was one of the topics we were discussing. It's a major issue for Mexico. Give us a sense of the outcome. I made the mistake of going to Politico Mexico to look for the results. And of course, they were spending the whole night saying how it was a total failure. But that doesn't really seem like the case. I heard you and Alina Duarte talking about this a little bit the other day. But how did it go? And what are some of the initial reactions flowing from it?
Yeah, so actually, just briefly, I'm now on a program in Mexico's public broadcaster, Canal Once with Alina. So we're having a great time over there, a show called Sin Muros or Without Walls. So anyways, that's something new since last we talked. Um, so yeah, as you can imagine, I'm not in agreement with Politico or The Economist or the New York Times or as to any of the U.S. media that have tried to cast all kinds of aspersions on Mexico's judicial elections. I actually think it was a resounding success. Mexico came out peacefully with great civic spirit on Sunday to elect an entire new Supreme Court and 880 judges and magistrates. So that includes federal magistrates, federal judges at the district and circuit level. It includes the electoral tribunal, and it also includes a new disciplinary tribunal that will have teeth to be able to sanction and even remove corrupt judges. People turned out, and the results are still being tabulated. But I think what we see here, and I think we talked about this last time, Eugene, the fear of a good example. Mexico, you know, López Obrador, before he left office, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, laid out a series of constitutional reforms in February and said, please give us a supermajority in Congress so that we can pass these constitutional reforms. And there were two of them amongst the 20 that were very pertinent. One of them was to give greater rights and autonomy to indigenous and Afro-Mexican communities, right? And the other was this judicial reform to open the entire federal judiciary to popular election. So the public said, yeah, we're down for that. And they gave Morena that supermajority in both houses of Congress. So, the new Congress got to work and passed these reforms. So what's great, and this is why I mentioned those two reforms in tandem, who got the most votes in Sunday's election? An indigenous lawyer from Tlaxiaco, Oaxaca, of the Mixtec Nation by the name of Hugo Aguilar Ortiz. And because of the new law, the person who gets the most votes will become the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So that we are now in Mexico going to have an indigenous Chief Justice of the Supreme Court from Oaxaca, the most indigenous, southern indigenous state in the country, who spent years compiling a catalog of all of the different what are called usos y costumbres or local mechanisms of democracy of the 417 recognized indigenous communities, pueblos in Oaxaca. Remember, Mexico in general has some 68 indigenous nations, with their own languages, with their own variants of languages. It's a very ethnically and linguistically diverse country. So it's an extraordinary result in the sense that Hugo Aguilar is now going to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And this is what happens when you open the judiciary to popular election. People mobilized, people got out.
Well, Kurt, I want to ask you, amidst all of this, of course, right-wing parties and elite media outlets have tried to paint these elections as dangerous or illegitimate in some way. So I'm curious if you could talk a bit about the tactics that they have been using to try to undermine this process and if that's been effective in any way at all.
Well, the tactics have been to basically say this is a power grab. This is part of Morena's, authoritarian autocracy. Kind of, we don't know what stage we are in Morena's dictatorship because apparently we were a dictatorship before, but now one of the commentators said that we're in a germinal state of dictatorship. So they're kind of narrating the story out of order, like an avant-garde movie. We don't know at what stage of autocracy we're in. It's a strange argument to contend that voting is dictatorial or that voting is autocratic, but this is the argument they're attempting to make. And with the worst kinds of racism and classism, I mean, just look at the tweets by Mexico's established elites when they realized that an indigenous lawyer is going to be Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. I mean, just the worst kinds of, just this darkest side comes out, right? And this idea that indigenous communities were simply told who to vote for and they lined up and voted for him because, indigenous people don't have any agency or autonomy, right? I mean, just the worst kind of stuff. It really that in itself tells you why such a reform was needed in the first place, to wrest power away from such a corrupt and very racist elite. And so the other big tactic on the part of those who opposed the judicial reform was to boycott it. They said, all right, we're not going to participate. And this is a tactic they've tried before in Mexico's first initiative and referendum, which was a few years back on trying ex-presidents who may have been involved in crimes. They boycotted that. Then when López Obrador, fulfilling a campaign promise to hold a recall election midway through his term, because a 6 year is a long term, he said, I'll hold a recall election voluntarily halfway through my term. If you want to vote me out, vote me out. They said, no, we don't like that. We're going to boycott that as well. So now they decided to boycott the judicial elections in an attempt to undermine it by saying, well, there's low turnout. Well, the turnout was low because the opposition stayed home. Dumbly, because that means that, progressive judges swept the results. They could have done a lot better had they actually turned out, but they decided not to. So, not the smartest of tactics and strategy there. So this is the way they've tried to undermine the whole thing, by saying there was a low turnout, by saying it's just a power grab. I see it as very different. I see it as making judges beholden to the electors. Remember that Morena is a very popular party. López Obrador won by a landslide. Claudia Sheinbaum won by a landslide. It's very likely Morena will win again in the next round. So, Morena very easily could have, nominated most of the judges themselves over the course of the years. They decided not to do that, and instead they opened it up to popular election. So, I think what you see is Mexico's opposition backing themselves into a corner, or you're heading down a dead end where anything they don't like or anything they think they're not going to win, they're just kind of taking their bat and ball and going home and saying, we're not going to participate. Does that mean they're not going to participate in the upcoming legislative elections? Do they not want to participate in the presidential elections anymore? Is this going to become a routine for them now? Where is the Mexican opposition headed? In tandem with international media? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a great question. I mean, they seem to be, ushering themselves out of the pages of history with this sort of extreme obstructionism. And I feel like, just maybe even from a historical perspective, this has so often been the case, Kurt, that Mexico, when it enters a period of great reform, is deeply demonized in the United States as, some sort of terrible, evil dictatorship. But that's so much, I think, of what this fourth transformation concept is really all about, is moving the country forward in yet another, many countries, I guess you could say this about, but I feel like Mexico has these very distinct periods, of significant reform that have transformed the country, that have established certain basic rights, certain foundations for things moving forward, that this really is a sign, as you've been saying throughout this entire interview, that this is a real transformation. Things are really changing in Mexico.
Well, yeah. And, I think this is an important, point to reflect on also for the U.S. left and the global North left and other lefts, right? There's a big difference between taking office and taking power. So you can win an election and take office, and then you can just sit on your hands and make excuses for not fundamentally changing structures. We've seen it in the US over and over, because of the parliamentarian, because of this, because of that, right? Biden presented his own weak and kind of diluted form, which is very similar to Mexico's judicial reform, but it didn't go anywhere, right? Morena is very different in the fact that you have to understand that if you actually want to carry out a transformation, you have to go out take on entrenched power structures. You have to take them on. You can't just make excuses that, the judges are overruling everything on technicalities, or they're releasing criminals on Saturdays, or half of the judicial branch is made up of nepotism, is made up of family members of the judges, or they pay themselves stratospheric salaries of $30,000 a month, including benefits. That's just the way it is. Well, no, that isn't the way it has to be, and I think what really burns the Mexican opposition is that Morena has carried this out by the established mechanisms of the Constitution. They went out and said, we want a 2/3 majority to be able to change this. And the public said, all right. And it's interesting that, people talk about low turnout, and, it was a complicated election. you would get between 6 and sometimes up to 10 or 11 different ballots. And, you have to, for example, for the Supreme Court, you have to choose 5 women from a list and 4 men from a list because there's gender parity. And then for the other different ballots, you might have to choose 3 people or 2, or, it's not easy. It's not easy. So, people really were, it was really fun to watch over the days and weeks before the election of people making their lists and compiling their lists and consulting with friends and consulting with people that they trusted, because these were nonpartisan elections. Parties could not endorse specific judges. And, there wasn't, they couldn't, fundraise from millionaires to have these costly, very expensive campaigns. So it was very much a word of mouth campaign and on social media, on interviews. And it was really interesting to watch, this opaque judicial branch where people usually have no idea who are the judges that are really deciding on important things like mining issues and energy issues and environmental issues and water issues. All of a sudden, these names were coming out. People saying, what have they ruled on before? Where have they been before? Who is this person, right? And, it was a very interesting civic exercise. So, that part of it was interesting to watch. I was out at the polls on Sunday watching people vote. They were excited for it. And a poll on the eve of the election, held by the El País newspaper and ENCO, which are hardly friends of Morena, showed that 71% of Mexicans believe that the judicial elections are necessary. Necessarily mean they're all going to come out on a Sunday and fill out 9 ballots, but they understood the necessity of it. And that was a majority not only of Morena voters, but of opposition parties and of independents, because people in Mexico have lived this. This is lived experience. And whatever propaganda is coming from international media, you can't contradict lived experience. People know exactly what it's like to have to pay a bribe to a judge, or exactly what it's like to have a ruling that goes against them because somebody else paid a larger bribe, or because a multinational corporation swooped in and had judges in their pocket. People know exactly what that experience is like. And so, you can't go against lived experience. So, I think that was the important takeaway from Sunday. And I think one more thing on this, first of all, 40 states in the United States elect judges in whole or part. So let the hypocrisy flow from U.S. media. I think in a generation, we'll see the step that Mexico took as a vanguard process where electing judges will be seen as obvious as votes for women or for young people or all of the other steps we had to go to expand the franchise over the years, right? And it took Mexico to do it because the United States is clearly in no shape to be doing it right now.
That's for sure. Going backwards from a judicial perspective. Well, Kurt, as always, it's an honor to have you here helping us sort through it all. Kurt Hackbarth, writer and journalist, thanks so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks, Eugene. Thanks, Rania.
Rania?
Well, Eugene, Mexico is... I think that, when it comes to what everybody thought was going to happen after AMLO was out of office, they assumed, it was all just the leader. But there's people, there's movements behind Morena. And obviously Claudia Sheinbaum is a very strong leader and she's important. But I think it also speaks to the importance of the movements that have been built in Mexico, that they've been able to outlast that sort of like charismatic figure. I think that's always what really shows you whether the people on the ground, are solidly in a certain place if they're able to move from one leader to the next and still keep their program going.
No, it's a great point. This is a total non sequitur, but I'm just going to bring it up. I read a very interesting article the other day about the impact of tariffs between the U.S. and Mexico on the avocado industry in the United States, because I guess we're probably both old enough to remember it used to be that avocado was like not something that was everywhere all the time. But because of the fact that more avocados had come in from Mexico, it actually created a boom for U.S. avocado farmers, because now people want avocados everywhere 24 hours a day, 365 days out of the year. So now all these U.S. farmers are being massively hurt by these tariffs that Trump claims is going to be helping U.S. farmers. So another little small part of how the interrelation between the two countries, it often sounds good, to the average worker or farmer, whoever, when you hear these things coming from the president. But there's a lot of things that, aren't that great, at least in terms of their income. So anyway, I thought that was a little interesting Thanks, I'll throw that in there. Now let's turn to the Republic of Korea, known as South Korea to many of us. Obviously, there was just a presidential election there. President Lee of the Democratic Party is in. We are very, very happy to be joined here once again on the show by Daehan Song, who's at the International Strategy Center and is also a part of the No Cold War Collective. Daehan, thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, Eugene. Thank
you're
you
muted.
for having me.
No,
Can you
I
hear
can
me?
hear. I can hear you.
Oh,
Eugene, can
Okay.
you not? I can hear him.
I'm muted, maybe.
Okay.
Oh, now I got you.
All right, cool.
I can hear. Okay. I can hear everyone.
Hi, Eugene. Hi, Rania. It's
Hello.
great to be back here again. Yeah.
Well, listen, it's great to have you, and there's a lot certainly we can get into in terms of President Lee, who he is and what he is. But I wanted you to start by talking about the significance of this election in terms of the circumstances in which it arose, and what it says about the strength of grassroots democracy in South Korea.
Sure. It's as I think some of your listeners and viewers know, like basically there was an attempt at a self-coup by former President Yoon on December 3rd. And of course, that process was the martial law declaration that he attempted and the self-coup was completely blocked by people. And of course, there were just like massive protests, like over 1 million people, like weekend after weekend after weekend, basically demanding Yoon's impeachment. And of course, he got impeached. And it even went to the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court also ruled him, upheld the impeachment by the National Assembly. So kind of like all in each step of the process, basically, it was the people that were out in the streets that were kind of like pushing the gears of justice along just to make sure that the process was getting done. And in some regards, the current election was kind of like a consolidation of like the defeat of martial law and the self-coup attempt by Yoon.
It's really interesting, actually. I want you to elaborate on that because I thought it was like the fact that do you think we would have had this outcome in South Korea had President Yoon not done what he had done months ago?
Sure. I mean, even before, I think it's very interesting because even before President Yoon did his self-coup, declared martial law, even before that, his approval ratings were very low. And he was about halfway through his term. So there's basically, his approval ratings were like 20%, and he still had half his term left. So he was basically like a lame duck president, right? So the liberal democracy of South Korea just makes it so that you have to just kind of bear it, right? There's no recall referendum. There are no mechanisms to bring down a president that basically has lost his mandate to govern, right? Because if you're having 20% approval rating and massive disapproval ratings, you're in effect like a lame duck president, right? But like you asked, basically what he did with the martial law declaration and the self-coup is that he created the legal possibility to bring him down through impeachment.
Well, one thing I want to just get here is what maybe some of your expectations are for President Lee. Interesting guy. I mean, at one point he was the Bernie Sanders of South Korea, then he was the Trump of South Korea. He's had some scandals that have been quite interesting. I mean, are you expecting him to move the country more in a sort of liberal leftish type of situation, or what are we expecting here?
Sure. Well, I think like just talking about the significance of the result, I think one of the important things to note is that basically in many regards, I'm not sure how much of it was a vote for Lee as much as it was a vote against the Conservative Party, right? Basically, 60% of people voted against the far-right Conservative Party, right? And especially the candidate Kim Min-soo, right? He had been a vocal defendant of President Yoon and his December 3rd martial law declaration. So basically, you had 60% of people that voted against him, and 49% of those people, 49% of course, voted for the Liberal Democratic Party, Lee, and that's how he won, right? But I think what's interesting is that in many ways, like during the campaign, Lee has actually called himself a moderate conservative, right? And I think that when you hear like, uh, because he was filling in because it was a snap election, right? He took office right away, right? And he had his inaugural speech the day following his victory in the election, right? And I think when you listen to his speech, a lot of it is just based on economic growth. And it's based on like national unity, right? And of course, economic growth is great, but you're not hearing things like how to deal with inequality, like anti-discrimination, like these kind of things that the progressive candidate from the Democratic Labor Party was actually pushing for, right? And I think in many ways, Lee Jae-myung, when he's also talking about national unity, I think to try to understand what that means is that, national unity sounds great, but it's also kind of like a key word for maintaining the status quo, right? Like, in fact, national unity was kind of like the justification for pardoning or freeing every president that was guilty of corruption
Mm.
and abuse of power in like the past few decades, right? So I think that in many regards, you don't see necessarily a move forward progressive in many domestic policies, but I think perhaps like in his foreign policy, I think maybe you will see some interesting movements and some nice shifts, right? Yoon if Yoon was basically at the beck and call of the Biden administration, I think the Lee administration has, explicitly stated like a more pragmatic approach to foreign policy, right? Not something that is so beholden to the United States. Although, of course, structurally, South Korea can't break from the United States just because of his history, the Cold War legacy, all these things. Despite that, like he's trying to strike a more balanced approach between China and the United States. And I think one of the interesting things is that he wants to engage with North Korea, right? Which was very different from Yoon, that had a very hawkish policy towards North Korea. And I think Lee even stated that, you know, that he would welcome like Trump's efforts to like start conversation again with Kim, and that if Trump like achieved a peace treaty, something that has not been possible for the last 70 plus years in South Korea, then that he should win a Nobel Peace Prize, which honestly, I mean, I think it makes sense. I mean, I didn't think I would ever hear myself saying that Trump should receive a Nobel Peace Prize, but if he achieves something that basically has not been possible and that in fact previous presidents have not wanted and have blocked, then I think that makes sense. Whether it will happen or not, I think it's a big question mark, especially because the last time he attempted, he basically walked out at the last minute and completely destroyed a lot of the trust and a lot of the work that had been built. Um, I guess just to add one more thing, I think that's very interesting is that, because uh, E- President Lee Jae-myung is kind of trying to strike a more balanced approach between China and the United States. Recently, the White House basically said something like, "Yeah, we acknowledge that, Lee won like free and fair elections," which is, it's a bit strange for the White House to be saying that. And then basically said something like, "But, we have concerns about like Chinese interference." And of course, this is just like for somebody from in South Korea, this is like completely out of the blue. It's like, what? Chinese interference? What are you talking about? That's like not even an issue, right? It's only an issue among like conspiracy theorists
Mm.
in the far right, right? But I think most mainstream Korean people would be like, what are you even talking about? And of course, that's there's no substance to it, right? It's just the equivalent of like like in the 19th century, basically they would have a gunboat by your coast and they would like fire some warning shots. And basically, that's what the Trump administration did, right? They fired warning shots, say, hey, just make sure that like what your foreign policy should be.
Mm.
I'm curious if you could talk a bit about the role of social movements. We're talking about labor movements, youth movements, reunification activists. What role did these various groups play in shaping this moment? And I raise that because do you see an opening for grassroots forces to maybe push beyond the limits of Lee's platform?
Sure. I think like in many regards, kind of like the current situation that we have right now, like I don't know how much your speakers might not like your viewers might not be fully aware of like the politics that kind of dominates South Korea, but South Korea's kind of like political spectrum is very much limited by the Cold War, right? By the Cold War that was instigated by the United States, right? But nonetheless, there have been very vibrant social movements, the labor movements, and various movements that were involved in basically bringing down Yoon and blocking the martial law. I would say that going ahead, I think that it's up to like progressives and leftists, including the Democratic Labor Party, to bring up demands around, tackling inequality, tackling, pushing for peace, tackling like discrimination, tackling like, protections for workers. It's like for progressives to do that. And I think the recent Democratic Labor Party was kind of like a coming together of different labor movements or labor unions, as well as different political parties. So in some regards, they didn't win much of the percentage of the vote, but it was kind of like a seed of hope for the coming term, right? It's something to build on, right? This kind of like work that they did together to push a joint candidate.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I mean, hey, nearly 350,000 votes. So, I mean, maybe a small percentage, but a lot of people if you think about it like that. Well, we really appreciate you helping us sort through all of this. A lot to continue to watch. So we will call on you again. Dae-Han Song with the International Strategy Center, the No Cold War Collective. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. Rania?
So the Israelis have now bombed, I believe, 6 times. It's just horrible. I'm sorry to just move to like such a different topic. It's just hard not to be following this as we move forward here, Eugene. But these bombing raids are endless. They've also issued evacuation orders for buildings in an area of the south called Kana, which has been the site of many Israeli massacres historically. So yeah, I mean, it's been six bombings in the southern suburb of Beirut, and if the Israelis follow through, more to come. And I just want to remind people that this is during a ceasefire. Lebanon and Israel have been in a ceasefire for supposedly since the end of last November. Israel has violated that ceasefire over 1,000 times. This is a part of that violation. There have been no violations from the Lebanese side. It's just law of the freaking jungle over here. It's insane.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really is, amazing that this is the sort of status quo. I mean, I think the point you're making about a ceasefire is so true. And it's one of these things about even the phrase, right? Like you hear ceasefire, and then for a lot of the world, the sort of issue kind of drops off the front page of the newspaper. Maybe it's in the back, at someplace. But most people think, oh, yeah, nothing's happening over there. So, it goes such a long way to this sort of abuse of nomenclature to hide the victims of this ongoing aggression. The point you made earlier that more houses have been destroyed after the ceasefire than during the actual war itself. So a lot to say there. We will swing back again to this issue after our next guest. And we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show as we move forward by Alana Hadid, creative director of Watermelon Pictures. Shout out Watermelon Pictures, activist and host of the Seeds podcast, launching tomorrow, Friday. Alana, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, listen, it's an honor and very exciting that you have a new podcast, Seeds, coming out tomorrow. Tell us why this podcast, why now?
Yeah, I mean, the concept of the seeds was to have the people on that everyone follows. Everyone sees them on social media, everyone reposts them, everyone talks about them, but they don't really know them that well. And I wanted to kind of bring to light these people that have become, part of the social media zeitgeist for Palestine, for so many different issues, and really bring them to life, because I know there's a lot of people who follow me because of everything I talk about Palestine, because I'm Palestinians, and they don't know me that well either. And so it's an opportunity for them to get to know me and get to know all of these other people.
First of all, I just want to say I've been in a very bad mood because the Israelis are currently bombing Beirut, where I am right now, Alana. It really made me very happy, first of all, to see your face. And I'm so excited. I'm so excited that there's going to be a podcast with you that we'll get to watch, and for everyone to get to know you in a longer format. So can you talk a little bit about, I know you've got some like teasers out so far, but tell us a little bit more about what you plan to do with this. What kinds of people are you planning on having on? Tell us, maybe give us a sneak peek about your guest roster list. And then also I want you to also maybe talk a little bit about the meaning of the word seeds.
Yeah. So we have a bunch of amazing people on. Poppy Lou is our first guest, Hassan Piker, Mona Chalabi, a slew of really phenomenal people have come on the show. I'm really honored, considering it's my first season doing the show. And I'll tell you a little bit about what you'll see. It's not a political show. It's us talking. It's a talk podcast. We talk about everything from, their early lives to how they got into activism, and everything in between. We talk about dating. We talk about all sorts of things. The Seeds is based on something I do with my fiance and my stepdaughter. I leave these little pods with affirmations or actions or things that I want them to do while I'm out of town. I go out of town for work a lot. So they open them every day that I'm out of town, and they get to do them. And I thought I would bring that to other people, as it brings them a lot of joy. I thought, it's an opportunity for a little bit of joy. And, in these times, I feel like we really need some joy and laughter and fun. And so that's what the Seeds is an opportunity to laugh with the people that are doing really great things in the world.
I think that's such an important factor, and it's a wide range of people, but also thinking you're the creative director at Watermelon Pictures as well. I mean, it's like, as you said, there's so much negativity, but one of the things that does seem important to me is the visibility and humanization of Palestinians as people and as a whole people has really, I think, exploded internationally in so many different ways, from film to podcast to even the activism itself. And I was hoping you could just talk a little bit about that, because I think that's an important part of this moment as well.
I mean, creativity is resistance. Joy is resistance. And when you are watching a film or being part of a community, you are finding yourself in an opportunity to create connection and to be part of something bigger. And I think that Watermelon has been doing that since the beginning. And Palestinians and so many other people have been creating joy as resistance since the beginning of their plights for liberation. And so we're just like a small cog in that machine. But yeah, I mean, I think with starting Watermelon Plus and this podcast, we're just trying to like build more connection and give people an opportunity to feel joy in times that it's really necessary.
I think that's so beautiful, especially because, we've all, I think, spent so much of our energy, and we should continue to a certain degree, trying to push the media, pressure the media, like shame them into being more honest, expose them for the censorship. And one thing I love about all this is starting our own platforms, right? Watermelon Pictures is a huge part of that. It's like, okay, if Hollywood is going to ignore Palestinian stories, Arab stories, stories of resistance, then let's have a space to make our own. And your podcast is a part of that as well. And I love that personal touch to it too, because we all of us focus so much on politics, but we're also just normal people We want to talk about and think about and listen to other people talk about all the things you mentioned, because we're full human beings. Not everything is just war and devastation. It's also living and resisting in other ways. And anyways, that's more commentary than anything else. I think that's so beautiful. But I'm curious if you can talk a bit about the importance of having our own platforms and spaces to say things unfiltered, uncensored, because, with these more mainstream places, I mean, they either ignore us or smear us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always talking about, obviously, what freedom looks like. But I also think that we have to start creating that freedom now. And it's very important for us to create our own spaces, our own places, our own platforms, our own universes with freedom within them. And we can do that now. We can create that freedom now. And Watermelon Plus is that creative freedom in the film world. The Seeds is my creative endeavor in the podcast world. And I think that everyone has this opportunity in whatever field they're in to try to create the spaces that are outside of these places that are being silenced and censored. So we really need to create our own places. And it's kind of to the point, if you build it, they will come. I really think that we need to start building those in every different spectrum, because we need to be building what freedom looks like now.
One of the factors I think is interesting about how, everything you're saying, you're talking with all your guests about, is I think something that, for a lot of people will say, oh, I saw Alana Hadid speak out, she's so brave. Oh, I saw Rania and Khalek say something, she's so brave. But to be able to talk to people about their whole life and their whole history and all the different aspects of what they're thinking, I feel has such an importance for a lot of people watching, because it's sort of like, listen, anybody who you see, who you admire, is a person just like you, and you too can be someone who's creative, who speaks out, who does things. So anyway, that's also, I guess, commentary, but I wonder what you think about that.
100%. I think humanizing people and really giving other people a perspective on who these people are, to realize that, you have the ability to also be brave. You have the ability, and it doesn't take a certain specific type of life. All of the people that I have on the show have a vastly different history in their lives. They came from different spaces and places, and they either became famous or they did something phenomenal, but they all are just humans who made a decision to speak out or to take action. And I think that it's important for people to see that and to realize that it doesn't take some specific lifestyle. It doesn't take like some magic pill. You can really be a advocate for human rights, no matter where you came from or what you did. And it's really important for people to be able to look at these people as just people. And I'm hoping that I'm humanizing not only them, but also just making a great podcast that just happens to be hosted by a Palestinian.
Mm-hmm.
And, Alana, I also want to ask you, while we have you, obviously we're entering 20 months of this horrific, just live streamed horror show. I feel like the word genocide isn't even strong enough to explain what we're watching. This apocalypse being forced onto people. We don't even really know the real death toll. And it just seems unending. It's so horrifying. And the last time I saw you speak, it was in New York a couple months ago, and you were incredible, because you kind of spoke to this, this, I think, feeling of people keep oscillating between being really angry and feeling hopeless. And you do a really good job of kind of pulling people out of that, whether you do it or not. I don't know if you do it, but you were very good at that a couple months ago when I saw you speak. And so I guess I'm just curious, how are you doing amidst all this? And what do you have to say to people who are watching what's happening and just feel hopeless, everything's futile? What's even the point? Because I think that we're entering that kind of dangerous territory where, it's really important to not fall into despair. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to feel depressed about this, but falling into despair and falling into hopelessness is exactly what they want.
Yeah, I mean, I get this question quite often from people, especially on social media, wondering what I do specifically. And I just think of the people of Palestine. I think of the people of Lebanon. I think of the people of Congo and Sudan and Yemen. And I think that we, regardless of how much that's being taken away in the Western world, have a platform and the ability to speak freely and have people listening. And we have to continue to use that platform wherever it is. The ability for free speech, we have to use it. The ability to protest, we have to use it. And when I feel like myself in a tiny bit of despair, I go to a place of thinking about how strong the people of these places are, these places that are being horribly, genocided, that are being horribly oppressed. And I'm reminded of the freedoms that I have that they don't have. And I take so much, of my strength from them. And yeah, I'm angry. And yes, I'm sad. And of course I cry. And of course I go to depressive places. I'm a human as well. But I gather so much strength from the fact that there are Palestinians still fighting for their lives right now. And I don't stop because they need me to keep going. And they need us all to keep going, not just me, not just the people you see every day. They need all of us to continue. It's very important that it's not just a few specific voices that are important. It's every voice.
They thought they buried us, but they didn't know we were seeds. The Seeds podcast launching tomorrow. Alana Hadid and a great lineup of people throughout the whole season. Alana, thank you so much for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm very excited to see her podcast. Already, the sneak peeks look really good. It's so well produced, and the conversation's so authentic, and she's just lovely. Mm-hmm. So, and we need voices like that. And I really appreciate what she said about it's not just the people you see like online that we need doing what they can in their capacity. Like, it's like all hands on deck, you guys.
It is. I mean, when you look back at history, this is, maybe esoteric for me to even bring this up, but this is the nature of the sort of revolution in historical writing as really pioneered by E.P. Thompson of the average people, the everyday person. Like, of course, look, there are always great standout leaders who play an important role, but, if you don't have the mass of people involved, you're just someone yelling on a street corner, and the people who you don't see, the sort of, faceless people in the crowd, all of that are actually the key element and the important part of making social change, anywhere in the world and any time in history. And I think that that's something that, look, Palestinians have been going through it since 1917, at least. I'm just going to the Balfour Declaration, right? So, decades and decades and decades and decades, and continue to move forward throughout the worst possible conditions. It's not the first time we've said some of the worst possible conditions, although this is obviously horrific, and continue to push forward and continue to stand steadfast in many different ways and to continue to find ways to survive even in the midst of a horrible genocide. And I think that the least we can do is, continue to be engaged, continue to talk and to agitate and to push. And, as you raised earlier, Rania, vis-a-vis the U.S. bombs, now that we've reached this momentous stage where less than 50% of people have a favorable view of Israel in the United States, which is, for the United States, shocking. So now the question has to turn to, we have to turn that sentiment into organized political pressure and organization. And I think that's the thing that is critically important right now is, we've overcome one hurdle, I think, which is the popular opinion that somehow Israel is a justified entity. I think now people see it more and more for what it is, an apartheid-style settler colonialism, ethnic cleansing state. And so now it's to take people who have, seen that and to turn them into an organized force. And it might not be something that happens overnight at the snap of a finger. I know we wish it did. And who knows, things might happen that we can't control that will bring way more people into the political process. And let's be ready for that. But we do have to dig in, I think, and keep pushing because it's critically. You sent me something this morning of countries, how people feel about Israel. And I was kind of shocked that in the Netherlands, it was like 93% of people or something said they had a negative opinion of Israel, which, I don't really know that much about the Netherlands, but I thought they could be cooked. Like, this is from a long time perspective. This is not what they want. So we can see the tide is turning. It might not be happening as fast as we want or as fast as we need, but to act like nothing is changing, I think, discredits what so many millions of people have done around the world and what the Palestinians have been able to do themselves to change people's perceptions. And I think it also should give us the strength to keep moving forward and say that we can make progress and we can change things, but we just have to remain steadfast. It's always darkest before the dawn, as the saying goes.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that said, I mean, some of the recent things that we've been witnessing, I mean, the Israelis have clearly moved into a phase now. They really want to starve out the Palestinians of Gaza. And they have these like fake, basically humanitarian distribution centers where they were luring Palestinians who they have been starving, like totally starving for 3 months. Aid has not entered Palestine for 3 months. People are dying of hunger. They're not eating for days and days and days. It's horrific what's taking place. This is like the famine period of the genocide. And so the Israelis for the past week have been luring Palestinians to these distribution sites who are desperate for any food and then shooting and killing them in the dozens. It's happened repeatedly. And then they go and deny it. They're trying to claim it's Hamas that's shooting people. They even released some like fake audio today. The fake audios are back, Eugene, trying to say it was Hamas. But actually, Israel's ex-defense minister came out and said that Netanyahu is arming ISIS-affiliated criminals and drug dealers in Gaza to loot aid under IDF protection and also to carry out surveillance and reconnaissance missions on behalf of the Israeli army. And so they're basically, this is what Israel's always wanted to do. They've always wanted to concentrate the Palestinians in Gaza's concentration camp into smaller and smaller concentration camps, essentially, and then basically hire collaborator like thugs, which you can do anywhere in the world, by the way. It's not like particular to Palestinians. You can do that in any situation in the world, to ultimately like help them in various ways, whether it's gathering intelligence or policing the resistance or the people there. And then they're, of course, blaming Hamas for everything. It's really sickening what's taking place, and even more sickening is the involvement of, I was reading an article yesterday, Eugene, in the Washington Post. Boston Consulting Group helped organize these distribution aid centers. Yes. And then people involved stepped down because people were getting killed at these centers. And I'm just sitting there thinking to myself, oh my God, they made a PowerPoint about this. Like somebody delivered a PowerPoint presentation about these aid distribution centers and was probably like, turn to slide 10 for, for how to genocide more efficiently. I mean, it's sick. It's like the amount of books that are going to be written about this horrific Holocaust and the different angles of it. The consulted class is heavily involved and getting paid for it. I mean, these anonymous people in Boston Consulting Group were like, no, we were doing it pro bono. But then other people were like, no, there was definitely invoices sent. So it's just all of the worst mechanisms of like modern day capitalism being used to help Israel continue to genocide Gaza. And Eugene, something else, a couple other things I want to add. One, the fact that Matthew Miller, who was the State Department spokesperson during the Biden administration, the smirking joker, as every meme would like portray him as, because he would just get up on that podium every day and defend genocide and cover up for Israel's crimes and America's crimes. And turns out he was just following orders. He was on a podcast. I think it was some British Sky News or BBC podcast. And he was like, Israel was definitely committing war crimes. And I was just doing my job. Like, I have to refrain from cursing right now because I know we're a family program, but go F yourself, dude. Like, it's so insane. So insane. There is a special place in hell for him and everybody else complicit in this genocide. And then the last thing that I want to add with regard to all this is, I was talking to some people in recent days about the actual death toll in Gaza, which we don't really know. Yeah. Because, everyone calls it the Hamas-run health ministry. It's just the Gaza Health Ministry run by the municipal employees of Gaza, many of whom have been killed. But, that number has been in the early 50,000s. I think it's at like 53,000. For a very long time now. And everyone's wondering how. Obviously, more people have been killed than that. It's because they have very rigorous methods for determining who's a martyr. Methods that, like, it's like people have to have their IDs on them. A lot of people and they have to come through the hospital system. And you might ask, what hospital system, right? The hospital system's largely collapsed. A lot of people are dying in the street, are dying under the rubble, are dying from disease, are never making it to the hospital, are being shredded. They don't have their IDs on them, that's been lost quite some time ago. And I remember that Lancet article that came out about a year ago that put the number at like 180,000, and that was a conservative estimate at the time. And then I know Susan Abul-Hawa had written a piece estimating what the death toll might be, and it was somewhere around that Lancet number. And again, that was a year ago. Yeah. And then I think about the fact that Donald Trump, when he was talking about the U.S. taking over Gaza, he kept repeating a number. He kept repeating 1.5 million people in Gaza. 1 million. And I never really thought too deeply about that, because I thought he just doesn't know how many people are in Gaza, or he's like pulling the number out of his ass or something. But then I thought to myself, maybe that's what they're estimating is left in Gaza. I mean, at this point, if we were a conservative estimate of who's been killed, and not just by bombs, of who's been killed in every way imaginable. I mean, think about people in Gaza who have diabetes. Those people aren't alive anymore. You can't get insulin in Gaza, right? Think about people who need dialysis. Those people have died. You can't get dialysis. They just bombed the last dialysis center in Gaza, if it was even functioning at all. Think about the people who have chronic illnesses who haven't gotten medications and have been under high stress environment, a genocide that's been starving them for 20 months. A lot of those people have died. And then you have the bombings, then you have the infections from injuries, from bombings. I mean, and on and on and on. So, I mean, I think we're going to come out of this and see hundreds of thousands have been killed in this genocide. And I don't know, that number, that's been on my mind a lot lately is like how many people have actually died. And it's a lot more than 53,000.
No, I think it's an important factor. And look, the rubble issue is a bigger issue than people think, because, listen, there are a lot of people who don't leave because they don't want to leave their homes. They don't want to leave their land. They don't want to move. And so, yes, you do see large numbers of people who leave when you see these evacuation orders, but there are people who say they're just going to stay no matter what happens. And, there's no count of how many people, move and do those different factors. I think the kidney thing you're making is a great point. The famine thing you're making is a great point. There's also the deaths that will come, let's say it just ended today. There are many deaths that will be caused by the malnutrition, the lack of access to different forms of healthcare and things like that over the next couple of years. I mean, for Christ's sake, there's still people in Vietnam now, however many years that's over, who are being born with birth deformities because of Agent Orange, right? There's so many, and that's another factor that we don't know about here that a lot of people are talking about, is the environmental impact of what's taking place, like the bombs themselves and the things that they're made with and the way that they're inside of them. But, you're blowing up a lot of buildings and different things like that, like what gets into the air, what gets into the groundwater, all these other different factors. There's certainly, and there's no evidence of this, so I'm just saying this, but what kind of munitions are really being used? I mean, have they used any depleted uranium, anything like that? I don't know, but there's all these other aspects to that will, have these long-term consequences that will cause a lot of deaths that will be directly attributable to this genocide, even if they don't happen during the actual period, even if the fighting was to stop, and hopefully will stop very soon. And I think that's important for people to remember, that for years people will be dying because of the effects of this. And the final thing I'll say, because I think you pretty much said it all, even if no one was being killed in these aid distribution centers, the way they're making people line up in these pens is just it's like a zoo. So even if they were giving out the aid, in a way that people weren't getting killed, the level of dehumanization is just, it's so massive on so many different levels. And it's they do believe Palestinians are animals. I mean, they say it all the time, right? All you got to do, it's almost like, I wish there was somebody somewhere. Actually, there are a lot of people who do this. I just wish that there was something that was easier. I almost wish someone put channel 14 in Israel on US TV with subtitles. Yeah. You know what I mean? And people could just see how totally, and then there was that, of course, the moment that we talked about here on the show of that very famous podcast with the two nice Jewish boys or whatever, who were yeah, everyone in Israel, we think they should drop nuclear bombs on them. And I'm just this is wild. And I think you'll probably know better than I do, Rania, the recent thing that came out was that 40-some% of people said they thought all Palestinians should be killed. or something like that. Maybe I'm getting it wrong, but it was like
no. It was like an insane number. Like Israeli society has been so effectively indoctrinated to like celebrate the genocidal horrors being committed against Palestinians. They're happy. We've never seen anything like this, by the way, like ever. I mean, it's really like stunning. It's like horrible human experimentation and how to prime a population from like cradle to grave to just like want to kill in the most exhibitionist way imaginable, because it's exhibitionism. They're celebrating it. They're happy that we're all watching them celebrate it.
Yeah.
And that we're all watching it. They enjoy it. I follow this Telegram channel. Well, a few Telegram channels that are like Israelis Telegram channels where like they just celebrate whenever anything in the region gets bombed. It's all hearts and dancing. It's really, really sick.
Yeah.
And you know,
you saw the people do that barbecue right outside the apartheid wall, like.
Oh yeah. I mean, right. Like it's crazy that Palestinians they're inflicting a famine on them, and then they're all just like shoving meat in their faces and hot dogs, and like it's so disgusting, Eugene. I don't know. I don't know. I didn't think humans could be this deplorable towards each other. And I can't understand the hate. Like I can't understand the celebration of killing babies. Like I'll never be able to understand that. Like I don't care how much I hate people. Like I would never be like, oh yes, their babies are being killed. You know what I mean? Like, and that's what we're witnessing right now. And then we're being gaslit because these people are like, no, we're the victims.
Right.
Like, right. And their supporters are like, we're the victims. Like, it's just complete. Like Sheryl Sandberg is like, who's gonna hide me? Yeah. And I'm just like, are you insane? Like you're actually an insane person.
I know.
It's really unbelievable. I know we're getting to the closing time here. And also it's late my time, which is why I'm losing my ability to speak. But I just want to note that the Israelis have continued with their bombings of southern suburbs in Beirut. They also are bombing the south of Lebanon, where they had threatened buildings and told people they need to evacuate. Again, this is the night before Eid al-Adha, which is a holiday that's celebrated across this region. I mean, Muslims celebrate, Druze celebrate it. It's like the only holiday the Druze celebrate. And anyway, it's people were getting ready for their holiday weekend. It's the kicking off of the summer season in Lebanon. I have friends who just flew into the country, family coming into the country. And, you know, this is how Israel's behaving with zero provocation whatsoever amidst a quote unquote ceasefire. And this is what we're dealing with, is just this monstrous genocidal country that just wants to completely crush all of its neighbors for just breathing. Breathing is a crime if you live next to Israel and you happen to be Arab. And there's one last thing I want to mention that is tangentially related, and that is that Donald Trump and Elon Musk seem to be having a very public breakup right now. That's kind of the only thing that's giving me any joy at the moment. So after we're finished with this live stream, I'm going to go read what I've missed around that.
Yeah. It's over Elon Musk feeling that Trump somehow and the Republicans are not cutting enough from the U.S. government budget. Richest man on earth saying do everything you can to make more people poor. But that makes sense because you need poor people to have rich people. Well, we'll leave it there for today. Of course, we will have much to continue to cover on all these different points. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you get the alerts for the things that have going. Hit the notification button. Rania, what else should people know on the way out?
Well, people should know that they should definitely hit that notification button and then let us know if you're actually getting notified, because I'm convinced that our friends at Google don't like us right now and that we're in some sort of algorithmic jail. So make sure you hit the like button, make sure you subscribe, make sure you hit the bell for notifications, and make sure you engage as much as possible. Leave comments, helps boost us in the algorithm. And also, if you appreciate the work we do here at Breakthrough News, and you want to help get us out of algorithmic prison, consider becoming a member of Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. For as little as $5 a month, you can help support this independent media outlet that will continue to break through our algorithmic prison walls. And also you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. And if you're a fan of the show and you happen to work for Google, maybe reach out to us and tell us how we can get out of algorithmic prison. I'm just going to keep saying that because I'm convinced. I mean, we're being suppressed. I can see it happening. I've been watching the numbers throughout the entire show.
Well, and since you're a rebellious prisoner now, Rania, you're going to get us sent to solitary confinement.
No, that's not what I asked for. No, absolutely not.
Oh, man.
I'll just be shouting on. Can you imagine what would solitary confinement on YouTube be? It's like you're capped at one view.
We need trustee status in the Google prison. But we're gonna leave it there. Big shout out to all of our guests. Big shout out to all of you who are watching us, and for myself, for Rania, for the whole Breakthrough News team. We will see you next time.